we're going to move to the next section of the plot twist mastery training program, the big 4 months program, and also the next section to this webinar. But it's connected to the previous one. This is something fundamental as well, and it's about dramatic surprise. So that's no secret. I'm not going to reveal anything surprising if I say that plot twists are based on the idea of surprise. Plot twists only work because something surprising happens, and no surprises here. And surprise itself is very simple. We just let a situation happen that was not expected by our readers or audience. But what is a little bit more interesting and a little bit more varied and sophisticated is the way we set up the dramatic surprise, because as I mentioned before, there are 2 stages to a plot twist. There's a false premise and the disproof. So the false premise phase is when we set up the surprise that we will deliver later. And there is actually quite a number of ways to establish the dramatic surprise, probably about a couple of dozens of them, but all of them can be categorized by 3 major categories. And I'd like to share with you these 3 categories because, again, it will help understanding plot twists a lot better. So the first such category of the setup for the dramatic surprise is simple surprise. Simple surprise works like this. We expect one thing and something else happens instead. And that's why it's simple. It's really just, expect one thing, something else happens instead. And here I also wanted to show you how I work with writers in general. Mona, you're already familiar. I like giving people patterns. I like using a pattern in order to solve creative problems. I have a few hundreds of patterns for plot twists, and probably a little over 100 of the best ones will be used in the 4-month program. But just as a little illustration, here's a pattern for dramatic surprise. I already used it for our taxi story. Let's apply the same pattern to some entirely different genre. So for example, let's say my genre is a goofy comedy about simpletons, simple-minded people, the Dumb and Dumber kind of material. So my protagonist is a simple-minded guy, and we need to put him right away into some kind of very recognizable, simple and genre-appropriate dramatic situation that comes with a range of expected. So for example, such recognizable dramatic situation for a simpleton character could be that he badly needs to go to the bathroom right now, and of course he can't find the bathroom. You can recognize from this pattern that it's exactly the same pattern as catching the cab and not being able to get one. The same thing, just a different genre, so I sort of brought it down a little bit, made it a little bit more ridiculous, and becomes wanting to go to the bathroom right now and not finding any public bathroom anywhere. So finally he finds the bathroom, and it's one of those unisex bathrooms that are available for anybody. The only problem is, there's this little dial on the door and it says occupied. So what would a simple-minded character do in a situation when he badly needs to go to the bathroom but it's occupied? What's the most natural action for a moron to take? What would he do? He would knock at the door. Even though it's occupied, he won't just wait patiently, he would just knock, hoping, I guess, that somebody who's doing the business there will immediately stop doing whatever they're doing and just open the door for him. He does that. He's using this boom, boom, boom kind of iconic knock for whatever reason. And then all of a sudden the door is thrown open, and inside there are masked, hooded, camouflaged figures who pull him in, chloroform him, and then he wakes up in a different country. And he already peed his pants, and there is a explosive device attached to his leg, and he cannot remove it. So now we are all of a sudden in the action comedy, goofy action comedy with a moronic protagonist, and he needs to save the day. He is the kind of simple-minded version of the Ethan Hunt from Mission Impossible character. Now he needs to figure out why he was kidnapped, probably mistaken for somebody who was supposed to use this special knock to knock into the bathroom, and they were waiting to ambush him, but he beat that guy to the punch, and he needs to figure out how to remove the explosive device, because we always know that when we create a plot twist we need to include something that would allow us to move on with the story. So that's the explosive device. And all of that is an illustration of how we can use the same pattern to a different kind of story. We could apply the same pattern not to comedy, but to drama, to science fiction, to anything else we want. But also it's an illustration of a simple surprise. So his dramatic situation comes with a certain range of expected. He may go to a bathroom, he may pee his pants, he may have to, because the door is closed, he may find a convenient street corner or a tree and try to pee there and then get a ticket or even get arrested for public urination or something like that. That is the range of expected, but kidnapping is a surprise, something that is not within the range of expected, and that's how simple surprise works. We expect one thing, but something else happens instead. Simple surprise, very simple. So there's the second kind of setup for surprise in dramatic storytelling, and that is a complex surprise. Complex surprise. That one is very useful, very interesting, because it allows us great flexibility in hiding the surprise, hiding the moment of disproof. What happens during a complex surprise setup is that we provide to our readers or audience multiple possible ways to interpret the clues that we give them. We provide, so to speak, multiple false premises at the same time, making people a little hazy about what is happening. And when we do that, we have better opportunity to disguise the truth. Because, as I mentioned, our readers always try to figure out what is actually happening, what will happen in the future. But when we pull them in all kinds of different directions, they will stop guessing, because they will just realize there's no way for them to guess. They will not know. We are being a little bit like magicians on stage. We provide multiple misdirections with our cards, offer them a card to pull, but we hide the one that is actually in our sleeve. So to give you a simple example of how complex surprise setup works, suppose we are in the hard-boiled detective drama story, or hard-boiled whodunit, or even in a spy thriller, and our private eye character, or maybe even unwilling protagonist, find themselves entangled in some kind of mysterious shenanigans, some kind of mysterious going-ons that indicate some dangerous conspiracy of some sort, and that character is beginning to investigate the conspiracy. So, one second, Mona, I see that you logged in from another place and I'm unmuting you there as well. In that type of genre, our protagonist eventually meets a typical classic supporting character, a femme fatale, a shapeshifter kind of character in this genre of story, who is a little bit unpredictable and it's difficult to read. She may be a friend, or maybe she's an enemy. She might be infatuated by our protagonist, and she shows the signs of being in love with him, but maybe she's just trying to trick him into falling for her, and she does it because she wants to lure him to his doom. Maybe she is vulnerable damsel in distress, because there is a certain evidence that she needs helping, saving from something. But maybe, like psychopaths do sometimes, maybe vulnerability is her trick, and maybe she is pretending to be vulnerable so that she becomes more likable and provokes this impulse to help her, so that she can destroy our protagonist. So these are all multiple interpretations of that one character that we are handing to the audience. What we are hiding from them, though, is the truth, and then we deliver it in the form of the disproof phase, which is perceived as a plot twist. She is, as it turns out, an undercover operative who infiltrated the gang of bad guys, the villains, in order to expose them and save potentially hundreds of thousands of people from some kind of evil plan. And when she sees our protagonist, she at first believes him to be somebody bad who tries to expose her to the bad guys, and so she's trying to figure out what he's all about, and she's probing him using her feminine charms, trying to seduce him, make him open up and figure out if he is a bad person, a good person. But then she realizes that he is innocent, and then she receives a directive from her superiors to sacrifice him so that he doesn't jeopardize her own mission. It's so important for so many people that they choose to sacrifice him rather than endanger hundreds of thousands of others. But she is by that point in love with him, so she cannot do that, and then we have the whole second and third act of our story, and we have plenty of things to tell. But the moment when she turns out to be an undercover agent is the moment of disproof, and what we're disproving is the whole bunch of different possible false notions that we established during the complex surprise setup. That's how complex surprise setup works. Alright, and finally, there's the most unusual and interesting, useful kind of setup for dramatic surprise. No surprise. And the way it works is really fun. It's basically the situation when we make a promise to our readers or audience. We tell them exactly, in no uncertain terms, what is going to happen in our story, and yet they don't believe it. They refuse to believe it. They are that event that is going to happen is so undesirable to them that they just don't want it to happen, and they are in denial about it. Or, for example, that event is highly unlikely to happen for whatever reason. It's unlikely to happen because it would violate genre conventions, or it's unlikely to happen because we provide the evidence to the contrary, or it's unlikely to happen because a very unreliable character, known liar, talks about it in our story. So for whatever reason, the belief that something will not happen outweighs the belief that it's likely to happen. And then when finally that event does take place, the audience is shocked, and it becomes a surprise, a plot twist. So for example, the basic fundamental example, let's say that we have a story in which a bomb is about to go off, and our noble protagonist bravely follows the clues, chases the bad guys, has fist fights with them, survives the shootouts, and all of that in order to figure out where the bomb is placed, in order to disable it and prevent it from obliterating a big city. So it's one of those action thrillers, and we already know that the bomb will never explode in the action thriller genre. And plus, we're compassionate people, we don't want it to explode in any case. And then the bomb blows up, obliterates the city, and kills the protagonist in the process. And suddenly we're in the final act where somebody else is our protagonist, actually, not the guy we thought was the protagonist. And we're dealing with the consequences of that explosion. And we still have the bad guys to pursue and punish for what they have done. So even though I'm describing a somewhat unlikely screenplay, but it's possible we could create something like that. And many stories actually exist that violate the genre conventions in that way and make something that we know from all the other examples of that genre that we experienced before cannot possibly happen. But that happens, and that becomes a no surprise. Like with the explosive device scenario, realistically there is 99.9999999 chance in that story for the bomb to go off and for the protagonist to lose. However, we're so used to at the last moment he would save the day that when the more likely thing happens, we are taken aback, we're surprised, we're experiencing it as a plot twist. There are some great movies that use this. I feel that I would be spoiling that to you a little bit, but I most highly recommend to you a movie, The Wall, by Doug Liman. It's a military thriller about an American soldier in one of those Middle Eastern countries in a very difficult, dramatic situation. So the movie ends with a no surprise, and it's a very interesting way to use it because it's thought-provoking. And one of the things that plot twists do, they make people think. That's why plot twists are useful not only for science fiction or action-adventure kind of stories, but even for dramas. Another similar movie that also has a very thought-provoking no surprise twist ending is a German movie by Michael Haneke called Funny Games. most highly recommended. A very good thriller/drama. That could be another example where we provide the promise through the words of unreliable character, but we as authors also provide evidence that the promise that the character makes cannot possibly be true. Bruce Lee was a great martial artist and a great stunt actor, but he also was a very decent screenwriter and director. Unfortunately, his screenwriting is relatively unknown and he didn't fully blossom as a writer, but he wrote and directed a movie called The Way of the Dragon, in which a group of Chinese expatriates in Rome opened a Chinese restaurant, and a gang of criminals force them out of that building because I guess they want the building or something like that. So they are bullying them and trying to force them to close the restaurant and move away. This group of Chinese people write a letter to the home country asking a wise old man to help them to come over to Rome and use his wisdom and his negotiating skills to talk the thugs out of abusing them and into letting them be. But the wise old man, for whatever reason, is indisposed, maybe a little unwell, so he sends his foolish young country bumpkin nephew instead, and that character is played by Bruce Lee. So when he arrives to Rome, he immediately begins to get into one ridiculous situation after another. First, he suspects everybody of wanting to steal his bag. He's very suspicious. The young Chinese woman who meets him tells him that he should trust people more, and that Romans are generally very friendly and he should be friendly toward them. So he finds a very friendly lady right next to him and starts interacting with her in a friendly way, and ends up in her apartment and realizes that she's a prostitute and he is about to become her customer. So he runs away in panic, which is also kind of ridiculous. And then he eats too much soup in an Italian restaurant and becomes sick with diarrhea, so he's always in the bathroom. And so he is in the bathroom when the thugs arrive and trash the restaurant. And when he comes out, he is face to face with the weakest and silliest of all the thugs, and he's shocked because when he was going to the bathroom, the restaurant was perfectly intact. When he comes out, it's destroyed completely. And so he's so shocked that he allows that weakest and silliest of all the bullies to actually slap him around quite a bit, and he doesn't defend himself. Ridiculous character. But throughout that entire ridiculousness, that character continues to claim that he is the great warrior of the East, and that his elderly, wise uncle actually sent him here for a reason, because he thought that negotiating with bullies is a waste of time, and instead the bullies needs to be just proactively resisted, and that's why the warrior is a better option than the negotiator. But nobody believes that he's a great warrior of the East because of his ridiculousness, because he is a bit silly. And so when the gang ambushes all the good guys and they're about to be squarely beaten, a plot twist happens. All of a sudden, the foolish guy who claimed to be the great warrior of the East effortlessly and within half a second knocks out the entire gang, beats them up, and proves that he was indeed the great warrior of the East. And that's how no surprise, surprise works in this situation. We were told that he's a great warrior of the East, but we refused to believe it because we saw the evidence to the contrary, him just being a braggart, essentially. But when they deliver the action, that becomes a plot twist. The interesting thing about how we watch this movie today is that we know perfectly well that it's a Bruce Lee movie. So in that movie, he is going to kick some ass. We know it's a martial art movie. We know he's a great warrior of the East. We have no doubt about that. But because of the structure of the plot twist, false premise and disproof, the structure itself works effectively and delivers the emotional impact. And because of that structure, we still see that situation that we expected new as a plot twist. And that's another way how no surprise, surprise may work. We may know situation from history, from marketing. We may know how it all comes out, but because of the structure, it will still become a surprise to us, or at least we perceive it as a surprise. And a great example of that would be Titanic, actually, a James Cameron movie. Because when Titanic came out, when we went to see that movie, Nobody ever believed that Titanic is not going to hit the iceberg, not going to sink, and instead would safely arrive to New York City harbor. No, we actually went to see the movie because we expected to see Titanic hit the iceberg, split into and sink. That's the reason why we watch disaster movies. We want to see people suffer, because in comparison with their suffering, which we know is not real, our own suffering becomes our own situation becomes better. We feel better about ourselves. We feel that we are okay by comparison to those poor people who are going down with Titanic. And it's a win-win situation, because we know it's a simulation, it's for real, and yet it's extremely dramatic because it did happen in history. So we know that these actors don't die, and we know that we are better than people on the screen, but we also know the history about Titanic. We know what happened to that ship. So knowing the event, we still experience it as a shock when it happens. Even though James Cameron he went even further than that. He showed the pre-visualization of the Titanic hitting the iceberg and sinking, the computer images in the beginning of the movie. He already told us even that Rose, the protagonist of the story, will survive because he showed her to us as an old lady. And even despite that, we're still shocked by how the story turns out. That's the power of a no surprise surprise. I sometimes use the term plot warp when I talk about a major event that come as a plot twist even though we knew they were going to happen. That's because the event has such gravity, such enormous magnitude within this story material, that it's sort of the gravity of that event, according to physics, kind of warps the fabric of the story reality and twists it in the unforeseen direction, even though the story kind of goes where we expected it to go. That's the plot warp. No surprise, surprise. Alright, cool. So let me interrupt myself here and ask if you guys have any questions, and you can either ask me directly through the microphone or type the question if you like, and then we have some more time and we'll proceed to the next section of the webinar. Any questions, comments so far?
Oh yes, I have one actually. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, I can hear you, Johan. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yes. For example, in the case of the Bruce Lee movie, well, previously the movie was a screenplay. We had a screenplay, and the example of the cannibal genre. That we have a screenplay or we have a book. How do we make the title not to give away the genre or the plot twist? Because when we see, for example, when we see a movie and we see the trailers or the synopsis, we know that it's a horror movie. But then at the beginning, the first 20-30 minutes, we have this deceit that this is not going to happen. But we already know because of the title or everything. But not in the book. Maybe I want to buy the book because it's a bestseller. I recommend it to you. Why? What is it about? No, read it. I'm not going to spoil it. Read it and you will see. Okay, so it actually becomes a surprise in the first quarter of the book. But how to do it with the title? Mm-hmm. To give a title, that the title has also to be a deceitful device.
That's a very deep question. Thank you very much for asking this, Johan. It's awesome, actually. There are many facets, many layers to what you just said, and it's very interesting. I'll try to actually speak a little bit about everything that you said. So first of all, about you mentioned a very interesting phenomenon. When people begin to share movies or stories that have twist endings, or any kind of plot twist, really, a very interesting thing happens, and you can see that today even in marketing of movies and books. When the director goes online and asks the audience, please do not spoil the movie to people, do not reveal to them the spoiler, the major plot twist in the story. They actually address the audience. There has been some studio advertising that said, if you saw the movie, don't tell them how it ends. So that's a very interesting way to share experiences, and that usually happens when there is a plot twist. On one end, we absolutely must share the book or a movie with loved ones, with a friend, with colleagues. On the other end, we want them to enjoy it like we did, and we do not want to spoil it. So that kind of word of mouth, I'm not going to tell you what's in it, but you must see it because it's so exciting. It's probably the ideal situation for the story to become popular. It's sort of like when I was a kid, I was a popular kid at school. Whatever I did, that was always attracted attention, and girls usually asked, "Who is this guy?" Nobody knows, but they're going to find out. And by the way, I totally made it up. I was a nerd at school. I wish I were a popular guy. But what I was trying to say is that creating the kind of impression that the story that you're telling is this mysterious but exciting thing, and people want to share it in that way, as something mysterious but exciting, enigmatic but exciting, is the kind of thing that we achieve when we craft a story that has a bunch of plot twists in it. About the title. So that's a tricky one, because we have to find the balance. On one end, the title should definitely very clearly express the genre of the story. It has to be absolutely unmistakably clear what the genre of your story is. So if we're writing a horror about cannibals, it has to be about cannibals. It has to be clearly a horror. So because genre is how the purchases are made. People buy books because they are looking for a book or a novel, or they watch movies because they're looking to experience something in a certain genre. That's how the majority of ticket buying decisions or book buying decisions are made. So we cannot really hide the genre from our audience if we want a book to become bestseller in the first place. At the same time, we really do not want to reveal the plot twist, the genre exposing plot twist. So there has to be some kind of, we have to find a trick that shows the genre and shows that it's a cannibal horror, for example, and yet doesn't reveal much about that. So we can deceive them. We could create a situation of suspension of disbelief. For example, let's say that I would be using a philosophical expression as a title of that novel, and I would call it Life Eating Life. Throughout the first act, the first, let's say, 100 pages of that novel, I will be showing multiple episodes in which one animal kills the other. And so our audience our readers would believe that Life Eating Life is all about that phenomenon of predators attacking the prey. And then when I reveal that Life Eating Life also applies to humans eating humans, then the meaning of the title suddenly reveals itself from a new point of view. So the way to do that is find a way for the title itself to establish false premise in the mind of the audience, while also containing all the material in order to reveal to the audience the actual truth. And that's a very interesting balance that we need to create. It's when the clues can be interpreted in multiple possible ways, but we force a certain interpretation of the audience and then reveal the true interpretation. In this case, Life Eating Life, we would distract them by showing a snake killing a bird, and then some scientist commenting, this is how life is eating life. And then when we'll deliver humans eating humans, that becomes the true meaning of the novel. The other thing that does happen in this situation is a bit of a suspension of disbelief. People know they're going into the movie or into the story to experience cannibal horror, but they fool themselves willingly into believing that it's going to be just high adventure novel instead. That's a very peculiar thing, suspension of disbelief, when we agreed to be fooled. And in this case, you really should worry a lot more about having a title that is catchy enough in order to in order to grab the audience, as opposed to having a title that hides the truth about what the story is. I'm a little too wordy, I apologize. I hope I answered this question. But it's an amazing question. I will think about that more, and I will try to implement that particular question in the big story program. The other thing I wanted to mention also is that your very story concept can become a plot twist in a way. If you have a story that is based on a familiar premise, based on a familiar material in whatever form, then you can, in the very concept, you can twist it. The very story idea can be a plot twist. A little bit later, if we have more time, I will try to show several examples of how it works. But I have to move on.